You've probably imagined moving to Hawaii at least once: sunsets, surfing, endless summers. But here's what you didn't picture: sitting in traffic for 2 hours to drive 15 miles, waiting months for a medical appointment, or scrambling to afford groceries that cost 60% more than on the mainland. In fact, housing on some islands now carries the highest median prices in the entire country, far above what most residents earn. It's not just paradise with a price, it's paradise with barriers you never considered. And those challenges start with something most people overlook: the islands themselves. Hawaii's geography trap. Hawaii's geography trap begins with the striking contrast between its image and reality. Photos capture endless beaches, soaring cliffs, and lush valleys that seem to stretch without limit. But the truth is far smaller. Hawaii's main population center, Oahu, is just about 597 square miles of land, roughly the size of a single national park. And not all of that is open for development. Large portions are protected natural areas or military-held land. On paper, the state looks sizable thanks to its chain of islands, but daily life is lived within tight boundaries, carved by the ocean on every side. Those boundaries shape everything. Almost every item that residents use, from vegetables and cereal to concrete and fuel, arrives across thousands of miles of water. There is no highway or rail connection to a bigger state. Dependence on ships and planes means that global supply chain disruptions or local storms ripple throughout the islands in a way that is more severe than on the mainland. Even electricity has historically relied on fuel that must be imported, tying utility costs to the same vulnerabilities that raise grocery and construction prices. When the supply chain stretches, Hawaii feels the strain first. The remoteness shows up just as sharply in healthcare. Each neighbor island has only limited facilities, and the more serious care is concentrated on Oahu. It's common for patients from Maui, Kauai, or Hawaii Island to be flown to Honolulu for specialized treatment, especially in trauma cases. That travel builds time, stress, and financial burden into health emergencies. What could be handled by driving across a county line on the mainland here demands an airplane, with families caught between distance and urgency. Young adults describe this sense of boundaries most vividly. Growing up surrounded by mountains and ocean is breathtaking, but it also comes with an awareness of confinement. Opportunities for school, careers, and even exploration often mean saving for airfare rather than just getting in a car. For someone restless or ambitious, the decision is usually whether to leave the islands altogether or adapt life to a smaller circle of options. Many do return, pulled by culture and family, yet the geographic limits remain in place, shaping every decision about their future. For newcomers, the experience can be jarring. They arrive expecting a wide palette of choices, a mix of nightlife, job options, and cultural events equal to the richness of Hawaii's history. What they find instead is a small but tight-knit social scene whose offerings repeat quickly. After just a few months, familiar cycles form around the same set of restaurants, malls, or hiking trails. At first, the patterns feel cozy. Over time, they can feel restrictive, especially compared to the continental sense of endless possibility. This growing pressure is often described as island fever. While not a medical diagnosis, it reflects the weight of being closed in by water. On a mainland city's rough day, you can drive for hours until the scenery and energy shift. In Hawaii, that release valve does not exist. The limits of land create a psychological squeeze that amplifies whatever financial or logistical stresses are already present. Geography here becomes more than physical. It seeps into mental well-being, adding another layer to the challenge of staying long-term. The physical size of each island reinforces this. Oahu, with its nearly 1 million residents, still covers less territory than many American counties. Hawaii Island, larger in landmass, spreads its communities thin, with long drives and fewer concentrated job centers. Traveling between islands is not like crossing state lines, but instead requires booking flights. Each island functions as a world of its own, linked culturally but separated physically. That separation strengthens the feeling of isolation within daily life. Tourists experience variety in short bursts. They might hop from helicopter tour to luau's to reef dives soaking in highlights before flying out. Permanent residents know another rhythm: traffic on familiar roads, the same school drop-offs, the grocery run to the same handful of stores. Everyday living draws the circle of movement much tighter than a travel brochure ever suggests. The backdrop is stunning, but routine inside small boundaries turns paradise into repetition. Geography directs the economy in equally powerful ways. Limited space stifles agriculture and manufacturing, pushing the state toward dependence on outside shipments. Sectors like tourism and government employment remain steady, while high-growth or specialized careers face constraints. For many workers, this means a smaller menu of options, with fewer chances to pivot or expand compared to mainland peers. Decisions about career or business ambition are often shaped first by what the land itself allows. Natural hazards reveal the cost of being cut off most clearly. Hurricanes, tsunamis, volcanic activity, and wildfires can choke supply lines in an instant. When shelves empty or power lines are damaged, replenishment is not a matter of trucking in resources from another state. Everything has to fly or sail in, and response times slow as a result. Preparing for emergencies in Hawaii requires a constant awareness that the cushion of nearby support simply doesn't exist. And yet, the very isolation that complicates survival protects parts of Hawaii's uniqueness. Its landforms, ecosystems, and cultural continuity have not been consumed by the sprawl seen across the mainland. That preservation gives the island's identity and beauty, but at the same time, it doubles as a wall that narrows daily life. Residents adapt by leaning heavily on community ties, interdependence, and resilience in the face of tight boundaries that have never shifted. In the end, the geography is unavoidable. The small land area, the long distance to any other coast, and the weight of separation affect daily errands as much as big life decisions. Everything is funneled through the constraints that island living creates, and the effect is both practical and psychological. What seems limitless at first glance is built on a foundation of limits that shape nearly every choice residents make. Those same limits echo most powerfully when the conversation turns to affordability. The cost implications of being far from suppliers, reliant on imports, and constrained in land use do not just shape the landscape, they define how expensive life becomes. And in 2025, those expenses have only climbed higher, setting the stage for one of Hawaii's most pressing realities: the new price of survival. The new price of survival in Hawaii cannot be ignored. Every aspect of daily life commands more money than families expect, and by 2025, the strain has intensified. Life here isn't about splurging on luxury, it's about managing the staggering cost of rent, groceries, childcare, utilities, and healthcare just to get by. For many residents, the challenge isn't chasing wealth. It's staying afloat in an economy where even the basics arrive marked up by distance, shipping, and scarcity. Reliable estimates underline how stark that challenge has become. On the mainland, a household earning between $70,000 and $80,000 a year is often considered middle class. In Hawaii, local studies estimate comfortable household budgets in many parts of the state are closer to $150,000 $180,000 a year. That income level simply allows a family to maintain steady housing, cover essentials, and save modestly for emergencies. For households earning far below that range, the effort to meet bills each month requires constant adjustments and sacrifices. The difficulty lies in the mismatch. Average wages in Hawaii lag behind national medians, while living costs are among the highest in the US, creating a deep squeeze. It's not unusual for a two-earner household to struggle despite both parents working full-time. The math simply doesn't balance. Paychecks land lower than national averages, but necessities climb higher. The result is a daily cycle of budgeting weighed down by trade-offs most mainland families rarely face. Take food, for example. A carton of eggs that costs $4 in California may climb to $10 on Oahu. Milk prices often reach the same level as gasoline. Meat, packaged food, and even produce spend thousands of miles traveling before hitting shelves, so the final price reflects every added cost along the way. Even foods grown in Hawaii don't always bring relief, because smaller farms contend with high labor, diesel, water, and supply costs. Multiply those numbers across household shopping trips, and a month's groceries can easily total several $100s more than what a family paid in states like Washington or Texas. Housing adds an even heavier layer of pressure. Renting a modest two-bedroom apartment in Honolulu can top $3,000 per month, with larger family units costing far more. For those who live outside urban centers, cheaper housing often comes with long commutes, adding fuel and time expenses. Utilities only increase the burden. Hawaii has some of the highest electricity rates in the nation, averaging around 39 cents per kilowatt hour in 2025, nearly double the US average. Because electricity has long depended on imported fuel, bills balloon far beyond mainland norms. Add in water, internet, and insurance costs tied to natural disaster risks, and fixed monthly expenses skyrocket. Insurance remains another hidden weight. Living on an island chain exposed to hurricanes, floods, and wildfires raises premiums for both renters and homeowners. Even modest rental insurance carries island-specific surcharges, while homeowners in fire-prone or storm-risk areas can face striking annual bills. For families already stretched thin, these policies aren't luxuries, they're requirements, and they take a portion of every paycheck. Childcare creates further shock. With staffing shortages and limited capacity, families compete for scarce slots, often paying daycare prices on par with private school tuition. Many parents find themselves spending as much on one infant's daycare as they would on rent. The burden pushes households to rely on grandparents, aunts, uncles, or shifting work schedules, with one parent sacrificing career progression to manage care from home. These arrangements keep families functioning, but at real cost to incomes and opportunities. Healthcare adds another layer. While Hawaii is known for high life expectancy and better health markers than most states, access to care tells a different story. Residents face long waits for appointments, restrictions on specialist availability, and higher premiums or out-of-pocket bills compared to the mainland. For many, affording both insurance payments and surprise medical needs is a juggling act. Some skip appointments or put off treatment, not because they want to, but because they simply cannot afford both the doctor and the rent. Stack these costs together, and a clear picture emerges. For an average household earning $70,000 or $80,000, expenses from rent, food, utilities, childcare, and health leave little cushion for savings or emergencies. Families cope by doubling up in housing, multiple generations in one home, or by patching together extra income streams. Parents pick up late shifts, gig work, or seasonal jobs, while extended relatives share space under one roof to lower rent payments. These solutions allow survival, but rarely ease the weight. The image of a relaxed island lifestyle turns quickly into a web of financial compromises. The reality is that only a small share of families make what researchers say is required for comfortable living. Most bring in well under the $150,000, $180,000 range, leaving them perpetually short. Vacations off-island become out of reach. Retirement savings stall. Even basic emergency funds erode under the weight of recurring bills. Put plainly, the islands have become a place where survival itself demands more than many residents reasonably earn. This economic squeeze is why so many describe Hawaii as paradise at a price, a line visitors rarely see in brochures. Residents love their culture, landscapes, and heritage, but are caught between a deep attachment to home and financial pressure that doesn't relent. The question many families face isn't whether they enjoy island life, it's whether they can continue to afford it over time. And nowhere does this tension show more vividly than in dreams of home ownership. For generations, buying a house in Hawaii has symbolized stability and success. That dream now collides with some of the starkest numbers in the country, leaving many families unable to imagine a future in the communities they grew up in. Housing market in crisis. The housing market in Hawaii has reached a breaking point, and by 2025, it represents one of the most urgent challenges facing residents. Home ownership, once considered a milestone of stability and belonging, is now slipping further and further out of reach. To live in the same neighborhoods as their parents or grandparents, families now face prices that climb well beyond typical earnings, creating a divide between aspiration and reality that grows wider every year. Statewide, the median single-family home price is in the mid-$800,000 range. On Oahu, where the majority of the state's population lives, single-family median prices have already risen past the $1 million mark, topping about $1.05 million in early 2025. For many households, those numbers are staggering, especially when paychecks come from jobs in education, healthcare, retail, or public service. Even if income sources are steady, the gap between earnings and housing costs makes ownership look more like a luxury than a step toward financial security. This widening affordability gap hits working families in ways both practical and cultural. Communities that were once built through generations now see local residents edged out by buying power from elsewhere. Young adults who expect to set down roots are locked instead into extended rentals or multi-generational living arrangements. The symbolism of homeownership as a connection to family and land begins to unravel when the numbers put homes beyond their reach. The drivers behind these extreme prices are layered but consistent. Hawaii's geography limits what land can be developed. A significant share of land is either conservation protected, ecologically fragile, or reserved for military use. Zoning adds another restraint, as much of what remains is locked into low-density, single-family classifications that restrict new housing supply. Together, these forces keep development slow, limited, and often more expensive than markets with flexible zoning and plentiful land. The result is predictable: too few homes for too many households, and every shortage translates into higher prices. The role of out-of-state and foreign buying magnifies these pressures. On the neighbor islands, more than 40% of home purchases in recent years have been attributed to buyers from outside Hawaii. Many of these purchases are not aimed at creating permanent homes. They become vacation properties, investment holdings, or short-term rentals that sit empty much of the year. For local families struggling to compete, that level of external demand transforms the real estate landscape. Each sale to an outside buyer pushes comparable prices higher and puts permanent local residents at a further disadvantage. These housing dynamics ripple into rents as well. As property values rise, owners increase rents to cover costs tied to taxes, insurance, and upkeep. For renters, this means monthly payments that rival or even exceed what a mortgage would cost in other states. Many households spend more than a third or even half of their income on rent. That makes saving for a down payment nearly impossible. Without intergenerational support or wealth from outside, young families find themselves in a cycle of renting without an exit path to ownership. The pattern erodes long-term community stability as transient renters replace rooted households. Even those who manage to buy often take on perilously high financial risk. Stretching to meet mortgage payments means allocating most of a paycheck to housing, leaving little for emergencies or savings. With the perpetual possibility of job loss, medical expenses, or cost spikes, many owners live on the edge of instability. Meanwhile, the starter home class of properties, once the entry point for young buyers, has nearly vanished. Modest homes often draw competitive bidding that pushes prices hundreds of thousands above asking, shutting out first-time buyers before they can even compete. For workers across essential fields, firefighters, teachers, nurses, farmers, the crisis feels especially personal. They provide the backbone of society, but often cannot afford to live near where they work. Commutes lengthen as they move farther from employment centers to reach relatively cheaper areas. On Oahu, that means driving west into Kapolei and beyond. On Maui, it means crowding into limited rental stock near Kahului. On Hawaii Island, infrastructure gaps concentrate demand in a handful of towns, driving up their prices too. In every case, community workers bear disproportionate strain from a distorted market they did not create. The human toll also shows in cultural and generational terms. Among Native Hawaiians in particular, land represents ancestry, responsibility, and cultural continuity. When local families lose access to ownership in the places where their lineage runs deep, the impact goes beyond economics. Watching ancestral spaces pass into the hands of outside owners intensifies feelings of displacement that stretch back centuries. The housing crisis, thus intersects directly with cultural survival, making affordability disputes inseparable from historical wounds. Homelessness emerges at the most visible edge of this crisis. Not every family priced out of ownership ends up unsheltered, but more households tumble into precarious housing situations. Couch surfing, extended family overcrowding, and unstable rentals increasingly define life for a portion of the population. For those with fewer resources, the end result is encampments in parks, on beaches, and along roadsides. With housing costs soaring, many simply cannot find any feasible option, even while employed full-time. It's important to note that wages in Hawaii are not universally depressed, but they rarely align with real costs. The state's median incomes remain lower than the national average, and large numbers of households fall into what researchers call the ALICE category: asset-limited, income-constrained, employed. They have jobs, sometimes even multiple jobs, but remain just one emergency away from losing financial stability. In a housing market as inflated as Hawaii's, ALICE households face steep odds to reach ownership and high risk of permanent displacement. Solutions have been proposed for years, yet the pace of change remains slow. Affordable housing projects inch forward, but approvals and construction lag behind surging demand. Regulations designed to protect natural beauty or preserve neighborhood character are important, but they also contribute to gridlock in supply. Even well-intentioned policies struggle to overcome a market shaped by geography, zoning restrictions, and heavy outside interest. Programs targeting affordability are meaningful but insufficient against $1 million median in the core housing market. By 2025, the crisis feels entrenched. Ownership in Hawaii increasingly resembles a privilege reserved for the wealthy, whether they are high-earning professionals within the state or newcomers with resources from somewhere else. Ordinary families, even those with two incomes, find themselves stretched thin or excluded entirely. At the same time, the cultural fabric shifts as more properties convert to vacation uses or transient rentals, leaving long-term residents with fewer options to live and raise children in the communities they love. This housing crisis does not exist in a vacuum. It connects directly to the broader forces that shape Hawaii's economic system. While residents face soaring real estate costs and wage pressures, another sector of the islands thrives by attracting flows of money, energy, and people from outside. That sector is among the strongest reasons why demand for land and housing remains high, and why the balance of costs and benefits so often tilts away from local households. The power struggle of tourism. Tourism sits at the center of Hawaii's economy, both vital and deeply contested. It is widely described as the state's crown jewel because it draws millions of visitors each year, keeping planes full, hotels occupied, and restaurants busy. Visitors spend billions annually, supporting everything from tour operators to neighborhood shave ice shops. Without tourism, Hawaii's economic structure would look very different and far less stable. To give perspective, tourism directly, indirectly, and through induced effects makes up roughly a quarter of Hawaii's entire economy, with even higher shares on some islands. On Maui, for example, tourism contributes nearly 38% of total economic activity. That scale explains why the industry holds such grip over policy, investment, and community life. But this crown jewel cuts both ways. Every plane that lands brings more people into islands with finite infrastructure, fixed geography, and fragile ecosystems. The majority of visitors stay in concentrated areas like Waikiki, West Maui, or Kailua Kona, but their presence spreads far beyond those zones. Rental cars clog traffic during peak commute hours. Once quiet beaches fill before locals can leave work. Grocery store prices trend higher in resort-heavy corridors. What looks like thriving activity to outsiders can feel like displacement for residents, who navigate their daily routines through crowds shaped for someone else's vacation. The weight on infrastructure is impossible to miss. Public roads that already struggle from underfunding balloon with tour buses and rental fleets. Waste systems and water supplies strain to cover tourism demand layered on top of year-round residents. Even airports and harbors, which double as lifelines for locals, tilt operations heavily toward visitor throughput. State and county governments spend heavily to maintain capacity, but tax collections rarely equal costs. The shortfall leaves locals subsidizing the upkeep of systems pushed far beyond intent. Supporters of the industry point to jobs, and indeed, hospitality anchors employment in Hawaii. Hotels, shops, transport services, and restaurants offer tens of thousands of positions, yet behind those numbers lies a stark reality. Profits concentrate with outside corporations and investors. Many tourism jobs remain low-wage with limited upward mobility. A study showed tourism-related jobs had some of the lowest weekly wages in U.S. industry comparisons. This imbalance means that while visitor spending is astronomical, local workers often cycle between 2 or 3 part-time roles just to scrape by. Benefits like healthcare or retirement plans are inconsistent, and scheduling bends almost entirely to the rhythms of tourist arrivals rather than community needs. The result is an economy with limited ladders for advancement. Young adults see a narrow menu of options. Service industry employment comes quickly, but once hired, building beyond survival wages is difficult. Pursuing education or training while tied to irregular shifts proves nearly impossible, and the lack of expanding industries like tech or biotech forces many to adapt or leave. Tourism shapes not just paycheck sizes, but long-term opportunity, often corralling ambition into cycles of service. Communities near popular visitor hubs feel these dynamics most acutely. Sacred sites and cultural spaces double as promoted attractions. Events designed for community tradition become recast as entertainment. It creates tension over authenticity, the question of whether culture is being practiced or performed. Over time, this breeds fatigue and conflict, as residents wrestle with aspects of life represented to outsiders in ways that often miss their deeper meaning. Even attempts at management reflect these contradictions. Hawaii's destination management action plans, created to balance tourism with resident quality of life, have already drawn criticism for producing limited measurable outcomes, with audits noting a lack of clear results. The gap between stated vision and tangible change adds to frustration that officials struggle to manage the trade-offs. The situation plays out not only in wages and culture, but in household schedules. Many families find their lives dictated by the ebbs and flows of peak tourism season. Weekend work or holiday shifts conflict with school events or rest time. Seasonality carries risk as well. A global event like a recession or a pandemic, or simply disruptions in the airline industry, can slash visitor numbers quickly. For households tied to tourism paychecks, that means sudden loss of income. This volatility magnifies the already precarious dynamic, where survival depends on an external flow of arrivals that locals cannot control. Tourists themselves largely remain unaware of this complexity. From their vantage point, they are contributing, stimulating the economy, and engaging respectfully. They may leave with glowing memories and photos of luau's or hikes, but the structural divide persists. Their spending rarely bridges the gap between corporate profits abroad and local workers living in overcrowded apartments to keep rent manageable. That contrast, paradise for the guest, strain for the host, rarely appears in brochures or travel guides. Attempts to diversify Hawaii's economy drag beneath tourism's shadow. Growing renewable energy, agriculture, or specialized industries provide glimpses of alternatives, but none yet approach tourism's gravitational pull. State leaders walk a fine balance, cutting tourism volume risks budget shortfalls, yet sustaining current patterns deepens displacement and inequality. Tourism not only dominates resources, but politics as well, as lobbying power ensures its interests maintain priority even amid calls for reform. None of this erases the reality that tourism pays for crucial public services. Taxes supporting schools, healthcare facilities, and infrastructure often trace directly back to visitor dollars. Sharing the island's natural beauty can bring pride, education, and cross-cultural connection when managed responsibly. But the dual truths sit side by side. Visitors experience luxury and ease, hosts navigate costs and inequities. The system generates wealth, yet that wealth largely bypasses those who make the system function. So the paradox is stark. an economy stabilized by outsiders, yet marked by instability for those inside it. Every successful marketing campaign that promises paradise requires thousands of locals to work unpredictable shifts, bear heavy commutes, and accept wages that rarely match the cost of life around them. It is the heartbeat of the state's finances, and simultaneously, its most unequal bargain. The question becomes unavoidable. So who really benefits from the tourist boom, locals or outside investors? And beneath that question lies another layer of pressure residents face that visitors rarely see, one that touches not travel or leisure, but something far more personal: the ability to access care when they need it most. Healthcare access dilemma. The image of Hawaii as an easy and comforting place to live fades sharply when residents try to secure healthcare. What looks like paradise on the surface often translates into long delays, constant uncertainty, and high costs beneath it. For many families, the act of scheduling an appointment can take months, and what should be routine care often turns into a drawn-out ordeal. Instead of feeling like a system residents can depend on, healthcare in Hawaii becomes an ongoing dilemma marked by shortage, distance, and cost. One of the clearest challenges is the shortage of medical professionals. Across the islands, there are too few doctors, and the problem is especially pronounced in specialized fields. Cardiologists, neurologists, oncologists, and other experts are in short supply, and patients often face appointment backlogs stretching months. Even primary care providers have more demand than they can reasonably meet, which forces patients to wait or drive long distances just to see a doctor. The shortage extends across support services too, affecting therapies, rehabilitation, and preventive care. Mental health access is under equally heavy strain. Resources have not matched the growth in demand, especially outside of urban centers. Families in need of psychiatrists or licensed therapists often find only a handful of names available, if any, and most providers carry overbooked schedules that make new patient appointments nearly impossible. Recent statewide studies show the number of people reporting unmet mental health needs rose substantially through 2024, with working adults, veterans, and students affected most. For many residents, the only available options mean long waits, paying steep private practice fees, or going without support altogether. The situation on smaller or rural islands is even more severe. Maui, Kauai, Molokai, and Hawaii Island all have hospitals, but specialty services typically remain concentrated on Oahu. This forces patients to schedule flights to Honolulu when confronting serious illness or injury. Travel of this kind involves coordinating airfare, lodging, and time away from work, all while managing a health crisis. Emergencies are even more revealing. When trauma or advanced care is required, patients often rely on costly air evacuations. A University of Hawaii report noted that ambulance response times in rural areas can be long, leaving families dependent on medevac flights that add further delays and stress, along with heavy financial costs. Costs compound these access problems. Premiums in the islands consistently run higher than mainland averages, while deductibles and out-of-pocket bills push families into debt. Coverage often excludes the travel and lodging necessary for those forced to see Oahu-based specialists, meaning families must shoulder credit card charges or drain savings simply to pursue treatment. Decisions about whether to schedule or delay procedures frequently come down to financial trade-offs. Many residents wait, hoping symptoms resolve on their own, which can leave conditions unchecked until they worsen. Put briefly, the system's weaknesses appear in three major ways: too few specialists to handle demand, frequent travel or medevac dependence for neighbor island patients, and high out-of-pocket costs alongside unreliable insurance coverage. Each of these faults feeds into the others, creating an environment where something as basic as a specialist visit feels overwhelming. The ripple effects pervade everyday life. Parents live with anxiety about what would happen if their child needs more advanced care than their local clinic offers. Seniors face months-long waits for appointments, knowing their health cannot afford delays. Families with limited insurance coverage fear medical debt as much as diagnosis. Each story maps onto the same pattern: care is present, but not easily within reach, and every attempt to access it comes with logistical and financial hurdles. Children suffer from this gap as well. Pediatricians are scarce outside Honolulu, and diagnostic delays slow critical interventions for conditions like autism or ADHD. Missed early treatment opportunities create lifelong consequences. While mainland families often find faster routes for developmental screening, Hawaii's children are caught in a system clogged by shortage and distance. Such disparities weaken not only health, but long-term educational outcomes, perpetuating disadvantage across generations. Retention of medical professionals remains another defining challenge. New doctors and nurses arrive after completing training, but many do not stay long. The high cost of living, combined with lower pay compared to mainland hospitals, drives many away. Specialists who could help ease shortages often calculate the expense of supporting a family in Hawaii and choose instead to build practices elsewhere. Recruitment succeed in the short term, but turnover drains long-term stability. Residents confront the same shortages year after year, even as the state spends heavily to attract talent. This leads to a frustrating paradox. Hawaii often boasts among the highest healthcare spending per capita in the country, yet its access and availability metrics remain close to the bottom. Families pay more without seeing the results reflected in average wait times, range of providers, or overall coverage. The numbers reveal a system where distance and scarcity overpower spending, a reality that beats down morale and trust in healthcare as an institution. During disasters such as wildfires, heavy storms, or flooding, these weaknesses become undeniable. Hospitals, already operating near capacity, struggle to absorb rapid surges of patients. With limited ICU space, surgical resources, and staff depth, rural facilities cannot match sudden waves of need. External reinforcement cannot simply drive in. Everything depends on planes and ships. Residents know this, and the knowledge itself increases stress. Awareness of fragility sets in during calm stretches, making families aware of how quickly health services could collapse under catastrophe. Insurance gaps widen the cracks further. Many tourism-related or service jobs do not include benefits. Workers who have to buy into their own health insurance are quoted premiums that consume large portions of household budget. Those who qualify for state programs often face limitations on which doctors they may see, reinforcing wait times and long-distance travel burdens. The system produces stark inequities between middle-income households paying for costly private insurance and those locked into minimal access programs. The difference is measured not in policy jargon, but in anxious hours waiting for care. The experiences of families illustrate the toll. A child with breathing trouble, a parent requiring specialized treatment, or worker sidelined by injury may all end up navigating airfare and housing searches in addition to treatment. These are families already struggling under Hawaii's high cost of living, who then face choices that stretch resources beyond breaking points. For them, healthcare is not simply about visiting a clinic. It is about logistics, bills, and worry stacked on top of illness. By 2025, the overall pattern is clear. Even as Hawaii spends heavily on health, availability and access remain among the poorest in the country. Residents live in a place where a routine doctor's visit may be booked months ahead, where vital treatments often require boarding an inter-island flight, and where insurance never quite covers the ground lost to geography. For many families, a routine health issue can quickly become a logistical and financial crisis because the nearest specialist may be a flight away. And just as healthcare access underscores how isolation reshapes basic needs, another daily reality tells the same story in a more visible way. When residents leave their homes for school, work, or errands, they face a different kind of strain that shapes quality of life, one measured not in diagnosis or medication, but in crowded roads and the time it takes to get anywhere at all. Transportation gridlock. Transportation in Hawaii has become one of the most frustrating parts of everyday life. Independent rankings often place the islands among the most difficult states to drive in, and for residents, the reputation feels accurate. Narrow roadways, high car dependency, and a lack of reliable alternatives mean that what should be short drives frequently stretch into exhausting commutes. Postcard imagery of smooth coastal drives fades quickly when the reality is sitting bumper to bumper on a freeway built for a population half the size of today's. The roots of the problem are straightforward. Hawaii's roads were designed decades ago, when communities were smaller and traffic loads far lighter. The islands do not have the same flexibility as many mainland states to carve out wide highways across open land. On Oahu, main arteries like the H1, H2, and H3 freeways serve nearly all movement across the island, but space for expansion is extremely limited by mountains and densely built neighborhoods. A simple incident, an accident, a stalled car, or roadwork can trigger traffic that lasts for hours because no alternate routes exist to relieve the pressure. Car dependency builds on these limits. Public transit outside of Honolulu is sparse, irregular, and unable to handle commuter demand. Even in the urban core, the bus works for some routes, but cannot carry the sheer numbers trying to reach schools, jobs, and shopping centers each day. Neighbor island bus systems are smaller still, with infrequent schedules that rarely align with workers' shifts. Large-scale solutions, like the long-promised Honolulu Rail project, have been slow, expensive, and years behind schedule. Until realistic alternatives appear, cars remain the unavoidable choice for nearly everyone. Most households own multiple cars, which compounds congestion on the already strained network. Tourism adds another heavy load. Rental fleets of Jeeps, SUVs, and sedans fill roads every day of the year. Visitors are eager to explore by car, but this choice overlaps with the same roads locals depend on for their work commute, school pickups, and grocery runs. Tourist rental fleets flood narrow roads, turning short drives into hour-long commutes, especially in peak season. Places like Oahu's North Shore or Maui's Road to Hana are promoted as scenic attractions, yet for residents they function as vital daily routes swallowed up by vacation traffic. Cost magnifies the problem further. Driving in Hawaii is far more expensive than on the mainland. Gasoline prices sit at or near the top in the nation every year, since all fuel is imported. Long commutes across Oahu or Hawaii Island quickly add up, and families routinely spend hundreds of dollars each month just to keep their vehicles running. Maintenance bills are also higher thanks to salt air, humidity, and limited availability of parts. Even common repairs like brakes or tires cost more due to import fees. Insurance premiums, set against high accident rates and expensive repair bills, push ownership costs higher still. For a state already struggling with affordability, cars are an additional financial weight that residents cannot avoid. This tension feels most striking in the contrast between image and reality. Travel ads present driving in Hawaii as an easy cruise through lush valleys or along sparkling oceans. Locals instead describe long stretches locked in gridlock, creeping along the H1 or squeezing through crowded resort corridors during visitor season. What's portrayed as tranquil freedom becomes an exhausting routine of wasted hours and mounting costs. The daily experience of being stuck in traffic undermines the sense of calm marketed as central to island living. Attempts at fixes have been limited. Road expansions face physical barriers of geography and high development costs. The rail line, meant to ease urban congestion, has consumed billions while only covering a fraction of its original scope. Bus systems are helpful, but cannot handle the volume or geographic spread of commuters. Ride-sharing apps, while convenient for some, generally add more cars to streets rather than reduce demand. The future offers little indication that traffic will ease. Instead, the likely trajectory is slower growth in solutions than in the population and tourism that fuel the problem. The ripple effects seep into every routine. Workers spend hours both morning and evening in transit, cutting into rest and family time. Parents struggle to juggle school pickups and youth activities against unpredictable delays. Businesses account for traffic in scheduling, knowing employees will regularly arrive late through no fault of their own. The stress builds gradually, day by day, until congestion becomes not just a nuisance, but a defining feature of life. There is also a psychological cost. Many residents describe how traffic shrinks their sense of freedom. A trip across the island for errands or visits is often abandoned because the time commitment feels overwhelming. Families confine themselves to smaller areas, not because they want to, but because mobility requires too much energy and expense. Living in proximity to stunning natural spaces means little when access requires pushing through clogged highways for hours. The very natural beauty that attracts outsiders becomes inaccessible for those who live there. By 2025, this daily gridlock stands as one of Hawaii's most visible contradictions. Residents must own cars that they cannot easily afford to drive on roads not built for this many people, alongside fleets of tourists all seeking their version of paradise. And the impact spreads far beyond frustration behind the wheel. The question of whose needs are prioritized, those of residents trying to live their lives or visitors bringing outside dollars, reflects wider tensions shaping social and cultural life across the islands. Cultural friction and history's weight. Hawaii is often praised for being one of the most diverse places in the United States, a place where native Hawaiian, Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, Portuguese, and many other communities share space and traditions. Diversity is part of the island's identity, woven into food, language, and daily interaction. Yet beneath this tapestry lies friction that doesn't appear in tourist ads or travel guides. For many residents, questions about belonging, fairness, and survival remain sharp. These questions influence how neighbors see one another in classrooms, workplaces, and public debates, and they often trace back to deeper historical weight that still frames island life. A central tension arises between Kamehameha, longtime residents anchored by generations of history, and Malihini, or newcomers, who arrive looking for opportunity or a new lifestyle. For native Hawaiians especially, land and culture are inseparable from ancestry, while many newcomers see Hawaii through the lens of scenic living or quick investment. To long-established communities already squeezed by housing shortages and high costs, this steady flow of arrivals can feel like added competition in a system already tilted against them. The cultural welcome extended to visitors does not erase the unease felt when temporary vacation dreams collide with permanent struggles for space, access, and survival. This unease is not rooted only in today's market. It stretches back more than a century. Hawaii's annexation into the United States followed the 1893 overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, an event widely described as unlawful. That history continues to shape perceptions today. The wait was formally acknowledged in 1993 when the U.S. Congress issued an apology for the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom, explicitly recognizing the loss of sovereignty and the pain it caused. For many native Hawaiians, the political legacy of that event is not abstract. It is remembered in lived experiences, told through family history, and reflected in current struggles over land, governance, and culture. Land lies at the heart of this ongoing conflict. Large swathes once used or stewarded by native Hawaiians were taken and transformed into private holdings, and that loss still reverberates. Today, rising condos and resort complexes on shorelines once tied to community fishing or taro farming deepen the wound. Each new luxury property symbolizes continuing dispossession, often purchased by wealthy outsiders for short-term stays or investment portfolios. Meanwhile, many native Hawaiian families cannot secure stable housing at all. Research consistently shows native Hawaiians face lower median household income and higher housing insecurity than the state's population overall, making the real estate boom not just a financial challenge, but a cultural and social trial as well. Tourism intensifies these feelings. Hawaii's global reputation is tied heavily to cultural branding. The aloha spirit, hula, lei, and sacred landscapes marketed as sources of comfort or entertainment. But residents see how these representations often flatten or distort meanings. Ceremonies tied to ancestry or spirituality may be shortened into performances, presented primarily for visitor enjoyment. Sacred places like burial grounds or mountain peaks are promoted as must-see attractions. The result is a painful contradiction. Practices meant to honor ancestry are packaged for consumption, while the communities who keep them alive struggle economically. These patterns create complicated emotions across the islands. Many locals genuinely enjoy teaching others about their traditions and sharing culture, but the imbalance is obvious. Tourism revenue flows to corporations and outside investors, while wages for cultural performers or service workers remain low. Visitors leave with fond memories, but little of what they spent reaches the families whose customs and land gave rise to their experience. This uneven exchange fosters resentment among younger residents especially, who see sacred traditions and heritage sites commercialized without fair benefit to the people most tied to them. Housing highlights the inequality most visibly. At the same time that local families double up in crowded apartments or stretch budgets on rent, darkened vacation condos, and sporadically used second homes line the waterfront. Each empty building stands as a symbol of exclusion, proof that outsiders can buy into Hawaii as a temporary retreat, while local households scramble for space simply to survive. Tension builds not from isolated acts, but from the scale of these contrasts, visible daily in neighborhoods where class divides run parallel to lines of cultural difference. The conflict is not confined to housing or wages. It touches education, resource management, and land use policy. Proposals for telescopes on Mauna Kea or resort expansions near culturally significant areas bring disputes to the forefront. For native Hawaiians, opposition arises not only from environmental concerns, but from centuries of governance imposed without their consent. These decisions feel like extensions of a long pattern of erasure, development advanced, while local voices are sidelined. What might look from the outside like simple policy disagreements often carry historical depth, recalling generations of resistance to imposed authority. For those arriving from elsewhere, the social landscape can be difficult to read. Some Malihini move with sincere intent to respect culture, contribute to communities, and understand history. Yet even with good intentions, they step into a system shaped by economic displacement and historic grievances. Locals, already tired of mounting costs and disruptions, sometimes perceive each new arrival as part of an overwhelming tide of change, regardless of individual motives. The result is misalignment. While newcomers may hope for acceptance, longtime residents see patterns that have repeatedly worked against their survival in their own homeland. The meaning of aloha illustrates this disconnect. For native Hawaiians, aloha is not only a greeting but a spiritual and cultural principle tied to relationships, community, and land. For many tourists, and even some new residents, aloha has been simplified into an advertising slogan or surface-friendly image. This reduction overlooks the depth and responsibility embedded in the term. When people who view aloha as sacred witness it being sold as a product, frustration grows, not at the word itself, but at its misrepresentation. The clash between cultural meaning and corporate marketing becomes another point of friction in everyday life. These frictions are not abstract, they affect families navigating daily survival. Native Hawaiians in particular continue to face structural inequalities. Data shows they experience lower educational attainment, reduced household wealth, and worse health outcomes compared to Hawaii's population as a whole. Combined with displacement from ancestral lands, these disparities reinforce the feeling of being pushed to the margins in their own homeland. For communities that have endured colonization, plantation economies, and legal dispossession, today's inequities are not isolated. They are the latest chapter in a longer story of imbalance. By 2025, the cultural reality is layered and complex. Hawaii's reputation for warmth and diversity remains authentic, but it exists alongside tension born from economics, history, and identity. Residents balance pride in heritage with the frustration of watching traditions commodified and land transformed beyond recognition. New arrivals, sometimes unaware of the historical and cultural weight beneath daily life, are folded into a dynamic that predates them. No brochure can capture how questions of belonging and fairness play out in subtle daily interactions and fierce public battles. Understanding Hawaii today means recognizing this undercurrent of history's weight. The islands are not just places of leisure, they are homelands where disputes over ownership, culture, and identity remain urgent and unsolved. Residents who embody aloha in practice also carry generations of struggle to hold onto place, language, and meaning against external pressure. The handshake of welcome and the smile for visitors are genuine, but they live beside unresolved inequities that shape how people experience life here. And while these cultural and historical tensions continue to demand attention, another set of pressures looms with equal force. They come not from politics or economics, but from changes in the very land and sea themselves, changes now reshaping the islands in ways that no one who calls Hawaii home can ignore. Climate change closing in. On the surface, Hawaii still looks idyllic: clear water, golden beaches, and palm trees that frame nearly every postcard image. But residents know those beaches are not as wide as they once were. In many places, sand that stretched across football fields has narrowed to strips, and shorelines where families gathered a generation ago are being steadily reclaimed by the ocean. State climate reports confirm this isn't isolated. About 70% of beaches across the islands are experiencing active erosion. For a place whose cultural life and global image both rest on its coastlines, this isn't just scenery fading, it's the ground literally shifting under daily life. Rising seas drive much of this change. As ocean levels climb, waves push further up beaches and slam harder against the land. Sections that used to replenish naturally cannot keep pace. Seawalls built decades ago to shield homes and hotels have worsened the problem by trapping sand and starving down-current stretches of coastline. Families along beachfront communities have watched lawns and seawalls collapse into the surf. In some areas, homes already stand partially in the water. Counties and the state wrestle with impossible decisions: fortify with new barriers that may hasten erosion elsewhere, relocate entire neighborhoods at massive cost, or let certain coastlines disappear altogether. In each case, the toll strains budgets and reshapes communities. And the threat comes not just from a slow advance of the sea, but from sharper moments of impact. Storm systems now form with greater intensity, often unloading heavier downpours and more dangerous surf. Hurricanes tracking closer to the islands bring destructive winds that once struck more rarely. Flooding in valleys has grown harsher, cutting through neighborhoods and damaging roads in hours. When extreme storms hit, erosion accelerates several years' worth in a single night. Beaches vanish, outbuildings collapse, and Kanaka Maoli, who hold ceremonies along those beaches, see cultural stages wiped away by a single surge. The science of climate reports and the lived experience on the ground match each other. Storms are no longer temporary inconveniences, but structural threats. The risk does not stop when the water recedes. Saltwater intrusion creeps into freshwater aquifers, contaminating wells that supply island communities. Traditional taro patches and fish ponds, tied directly to native Hawaiian identity, now face creeping salinity that chokes crops and fisheries. Farmers who worked land their grandparents cultivated report watching production decline, even as input costs climb. The loss cuts deeper than economics. It undercuts cultural continuity. Each failed harvest tones down voices that would otherwise pass ancestral practices to the next generation. Tourism, still described as the state's economic lifeline, has no immunity to climate pressure. Resorts built against open sand now spend heavily each year to replenish beaches or protect foundations from surge. A coastline that once advertised leisure and rest can, after a single storm season, look stripped and battered. Guests may not immediately register those differences, but local workers, hotel managers, and residents do. An industry that thrives on timeless imagery is forced into patchwork fixes, importing sand, reorienting beach chairs, adjusting marketing shoots, while wondering how sustainable the facade will remain. If beaches vanish faster than brochures can promise them, tourism's foundation begins to falter too. The 2023 Maui wildfires showed that climate risk is not limited to shorelines. A combination of invasive vegetation, prolonged drought, and high winds set conditions for flames that consumed whole sections of Lahaina. Damage estimates reached around $16 billion, marking one of the most destructive disasters in state history. Entire communities vanished in days. While wildfires had long been possible, their scale and ferocity shocked Hawaii and the world. That fire season underscored how rising temperatures and ecological change make inland areas just as dangerous as shifting coastlines. It left residents not only grieving loss, but questioning what the climate future of Hawaii truly looks like if similar events recur with even partial frequency. The effects echo through psychology and economics alike, where people once counted on stable weather cycles and relatively manageable risks. Now they calculate the next surge, the next fire, or the next deluge into their household planning. Families maintain personal evacuation plans. Teachers guide classroom drills that once seemed unnecessary so close to the equator. Officials meet repeatedly to discuss relocation of essential roads pressed too close to the waves. These reminders thread fragility into daily thoughts, never far from mind. For families already pressed by high prices, the prospect of needing to rebuild or abandon homes compounds stress and uncertainty. Adaptation efforts are real but rarely lasting. Managed retreat programs move houses back from the sea in some communities at great expense. Beach replenishment brings relief, but only for a season or two before the sand drifts or washes away. Roads and bridges are patched repeatedly, draining county and state budgets, while little progress is made against the long-term drive of rising seas. Even when projects succeed locally, they shift risk elsewhere as barriers move erosion down current. Residents know they are spending heavily not on final solutions, but on extending the timeline against forces they cannot stop. Cultural dimensions elevate the urgency. Each stretch of land carries history tied to chants, ceremonies, or community practice. Watching beaches narrow until ceremonies must be held in crowded corners, elsewhere on hardened soil, sends a deep signal to those who trace ancestry here. It is more than physical loss. It is displacement in cultural practice, occurring in slow and visible ways. Parents explain to children that the tree or the hut they once pointed to above the surf now lies beneath it. The sense of permanence erodes alongside the land. Meanwhile, inland neighborhoods suffer in ways that show how climate instability reaches into ordinary life. Heavier rains overpower drainage in valleys, pushing muddy water over roads and into living rooms. For families already spending near half their income on rent or mortgages, paying for repairs or insurance claims becomes unbearable. With insurers raising rates or withdrawing coverage from flood-prone areas, households carry heavier burdens themselves. The fight to hold onto a home against financial strain now includes resisting water and fire, as well as banks and landlords. All these impacts layer together, leaving residents with far more than inconvenience. Every hurricane season, every drought, every king tide demands attention. Climate does not wait quietly at the fringes. It presses visibly against infrastructure, culture, and family survival. In Hawaii, adaptation isn't an academic plan. It's a weekly, monthly reality felt in beaches that vanish, aquifers that taste of salt, or hillsides blackened by fire. The islands sit exposed in the Pacific, without a neighboring state to divert resources from, amplifying both costs and fragility. The larger contradiction is now impossible to overlook. Hawaii is marketed worldwide as eternal paradise, but residents see shorelines shorten yearly and disasters stack closer in time. Families lose ground, traditions falter, and whole neighborhoods can be wiped out in days. The image of permanence depends on land that is actively shrinking. For residents, climate change does not read as future threat. It is present, measurable, and immediate. And while these losses reshape the physical landscape, they also take hold in more invisible ways. Beyond damaged homes and vanished beaches lies the daily psychological weight, the isolation, the anxiety, and the mental health strain that grows heavier as life in Hawaii becomes more uncertain. Mental health and island isolation. Mental health and the strain of island isolation have become some of Hawaii's most pressing challenges, ones that don't appear on postcards or tourism ads, but that shape everyday life for many residents. While visitors may leave refreshed after a week in the islands, those who live here long-term face a very different experience. The beauty of the islands cannot erase the pressure of confinement, rising costs, and a healthcare system that struggles to meet the demand for mental health services. One term that residents sometimes use is island fever. Though not a medical label, it captures a mix of restlessness and claustrophobia brought on by Hawaii's geographic reality. At first, the ocean, cliffs, and forests seem endless, but over time, those same boundaries begin to feel restrictive. Unlike someone on the mainland who can drive for hours and end up in another state, Hawaii residents have a firmly set perimeter. every trip ends back at the shoreline. For young adults especially, routines feel repetitive after a few years. The same handful of malls, limited nightlife, and repeated faces in small communities. The variety that mainlanders take for granted simply doesn't exist in the same way here, and the fixed boundaries gradually weigh on mental state. That sense of being closed in grows more intense when paired with financial stress. Work often requires long hours or multiple jobs, leaving little breathing room. Parents piece together childcare around opposing shifts, while single workers spend nights and weekends exhausted from service roles built around tourism rather than personal schedules. Costs hover in the background constantly: rent payments, grocery budgets, fuel expenses, producing a strain that is as much psychological as financial. This constant awareness turns daily life into a grind that erodes rest, family time, and coping strategies. Even simple leisure activities, like a day at the beach, often come at the expense of necessary work or the reality of crowded sands dominated by visitors. What the world views as idyllic, residents often experience under pressure and fatigue. Access to mental health treatment remains limited, compounding the struggle. On the neighbor islands and in rural communities, qualified providers are scarce. Even in Honolulu, waiting lists for therapy or psychiatric treatment can stretch for months, pushing people to abandon care altogether. A statewide survey highlights this gap starkly. The percentage of Hawaii residents reporting unmet mental health needs climbed from about 5% in mid-2023 to 22% by the end of 2024. Among those aged 18 to 34, the number was even more striking, with nearly 39% reporting their mental health needs were not being met. These figures point to a system unable to keep up, leaving many people to carry burdens silently until they spill into crisis. Disasters and emergencies intensify these feelings of vulnerability. Each hurricane season comes with waves of preparation and fear, especially after the 2023 fires on Maui reminded everyone how quickly catastrophe can unfold. Tsunami warnings, flash flood alerts, and volcanic tremors feed an atmosphere of chronic uncertainty. And unlike in much of the continental US, there is no easy route outward. When nature threatens in Hawaii, there is nowhere to escape. This environmental reality lingers in the back of residents' minds year-round, adding yet another layer of mental strain to routines already filled with economic and social pressures. Social networks, often celebrated as close-knit, can also feel confining. In smaller communities, word spreads quickly and privacy can feel non-existent. Dating pools are narrow, and professional networking often circles back to the same few industries. This can lead to the feeling of being stuck both socially and professionally, with limited room to reinvent oneself or seek fresh starts. For young people hoping to expand beyond service or government work, the sense of confinement feeds directly into difficult choices about whether to remain or move away. Layered on top of these pressures are cultural expectations. Hawaii has long been branded as paradise, and with that comes a silent rule that residents should project positivity. Admitting to unhappiness, stress, or depression can feel contradictory in a place marketed as the ultimate escape. Many locals hide their struggles or downplay them out of fear of appearing ungrateful. Over years, this dynamic builds inward conflict, people criticizing themselves for not feeling the joy the world expects them to feel. The disconnect between the marketed image and the lived reality intensifies self-doubt and erodes mental resilience. Families experience these dynamics across generations. Parents strain to provide while carrying hidden stress. Teenagers feel pressure to succeed yet limited opportunities to translate success into viable futures. Young adults debate leaving home for better options, while grandparents witness traditions weaken as children and grandchildren relocate. The loneliness here is not simply about physical separation. It is about watching community and family bonds stretch across new distances and facing the possibility that cultural continuity may not survive another generation. Even access to Hawaii's parks and natural spaces, sources of joy and restoration, can become complicated. When residents carve out time to visit, they often find themselves surrounded by tourists who view the space as entertainment rather than heritage. The places meant to offer peace come with reminders of economic inequity and cultural tension. What could serve as release, instead, reinforces the divide between the marketed ideal and the burdened reality of daily life. This combination explains why mental health has become a quiet crisis in the islands. Confinement intensifies stress. Costs drain household resources and energy. Healthcare systems lack sufficient providers. Disasters loom throughout the year. Together, these pressures create a cycle of strain where even strong communities and family support cannot fully counterbalance the weight. Some residents find resilience through cultural pride, close family networks, or faith traditions, but even those anchors cannot erase systemic shortages in resources and opportunities. In response, advocates across the state have called for more consistent investment in mental health care. Leaders have begun marking this as a budget priority, with pushes for expanded funding and services to reach communities most at risk. The statistics make clear why increased support is critical, and while progress has started, gaps remain. This tension, that help is needed, but still insufficient, is why so many residents continue to speak out about invisible costs their communities carry. This conversation about mental health reveals something larger. When daily life feels squeezed from every angle, geography, costs, disaster risks, and limited social outlets, people begin to consider alternatives. For some households, the weight becomes so heavy that they face a decision that was once unthinkable, whether to remain in the place their families have called home for generations or to start over somewhere else. And that decision leads directly into one of Hawaii's most significant shifts today: the quiet exodus. If Hawaii is sold to the world as an enduring dream, then the persistent departure of its own residents tells another story. The pattern is steady, if quiet. More longtime locals are leaving the islands than arriving. In 2025, the trend remains clear. Households uproot not because they want to, but because the calculation of survival no longer balances at home. The migration is not dramatic in the way of headlines or sudden collapses, but slow and consistent, visible in the absence left behind. Families raised on the islands are setting their sights on the mainland, trading familiar seascapes for affordability, broader job markets, and a sense that opportunity stretches further than the shoreline. Population data makes this shift undeniable. Even as newcomers, investors, and retirees move in, net migration has trended negative for years. Recent housing and job pressures produced net outmigration numbers in the tens of thousands annually, with one report showing about 58,000 residents leaving the state in a single year. The movement is heaviest among younger adults under 35, those newly out of school or building families of their own. They are not leaving lightly. Many would prefer to stay. But when the reality of uncertain careers and unaffordable homes collides with the weight of high costs, mainland cities start to look less like escape and more like relief. The effect accumulates quietly. Every young couple moving to Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, or Washington contributes not only to shifting demographics, but to future gaps. Schools lose parents who would have formed their next generation of PTAs. Sports leagues lose potential coaches and mentors. Cultural groups lose the infusion of younger energy needed to sustain events and traditions. What remains is a smaller, older base, carrying heavier responsibilities without the continuity of youth to carry traditions forward. The long-term result is an aging population straining healthcare and social systems, while the very people positioned to shoulder those costs move away. The reasons are the same challenges residents describe daily: housing that has climbed out of reach, wages that lag well behind median national income, and a labor market clustered around low-growth service industries. Transportation bottlenecks, limited healthcare access, and the constant erosion of disposable income only heighten the pressure. For some households, endurance feels possible only through sacrifice. For others, leaving becomes the more sensible path. The departure is not a rejection of culture or heritage. It is simply a response to economic and social structures that have grown too rigid to allow meaningful advancement. These choices show up family by family. Parents who sent children away to mainland universities often find that those children settle into jobs elsewhere rather than return. Grandparents who hope to hand down family homes face taxes, repair costs, and prices their heirs cannot reasonably cover. Cousins who once gathered at family reunions now join from different time zones, often unable to afford flights back to the islands. What held tight-knit communities together is loosening, not through neglect, but through unequal opportunity. Workforce impacts compound quickly. When under 35 residents head elsewhere, Hawaii loses more than its present workers. It forfeits its future innovators. Nursing graduates fill positions in California hospitals. Teachers trained at local colleges leave to join mainland school districts, offering higher pay and better benefits. Entrepreneurs open restaurants or small businesses in Las Vegas or Portland rather than within their childhood neighborhoods. Artists and cultural practitioners raise children far away, making cultural transfer weaker at home. Brain drain spreads through critical fields, healthcare, education, and technical industries, leaving shortages where need is greatest. Even cultural transmission struggles in this context. Language preservation programs, for example, require young households teaching the Hawaiian language to their children. If those families establish homes in Oregon or Washington, the continuity weakens. Festivals and grassroots activism depend on energized young volunteers. When they leave, the work falls on smaller groups, aging leaders, or overstretched families already balancing rising costs. Each departure seems small, but over time, the accumulation reduces the state's capacity to sustain its own heritage and identity against broader global pressures. For economic development, the loss is equally significant. Leaders know Hawaii cannot depend indefinitely on tourism alone. Renewable energy, innovation economies, and diversified sectors need skilled residents committed to building long-term futures here. Yet each year, the same graduates counted on to anchor those industries relocate. The result is stalled initiatives in infrastructure, gaps in research projects, and startups that take root abroad instead of at home. Population decline slows the very adaptation that Hawaii most needs to withstand its mounting pressures. On the ground, the absences are personal as much as structural. Neighbors notice houses left empty after families move. Schools reduce class sections when enrollment declines, limiting programs for the children who remain. Churches, community centers, and sports clubs lose participants and volunteers. For families who have lived on the same block for decades, the slow shift feels tangible. Where once every door opened to cousins or classmates, neighborhoods now shift toward vacation rentals or newer arrivals without the same generational ties. The weight of what is missing is as present as the bustle of what remains. Resentment can grow when this dynamic intersects with new arrivals. As local families leave reluctantly, outsiders with remote jobs and higher incomes move in with ease. They can often purchase homes outright, pushing prices further out of reach, or sustain lifestyles supported by mainland earnings. The paradox is difficult to ignore. Generational residents forced out to find stable living, while newcomers carve their place in the very communities they replace. Locals describe this cycle not as malicious, but as exhausting, a reshaping of community rooted not in heritage, but in purchasing power. This transformation unfolds without fanfare. It does not appear in glossy travel brochures, nor in tourism ads promising timeless islands, but its effects are visible across classrooms, cultural events, and workplaces. When younger voices steadily shift elsewhere, Hawaii loses not only population, but continuity. The people counted on to navigate the state's future are instead forging paths in other states. What is left are older communities, heavier burdens, and uncertainties about who will carry traditions or meet workforce needs 10 and 20 years from now. In context, the outflow is not proof that Hawaii is failing. Its landscapes still attract visitors, and its communities remain resilient. But the quiet migration raises important questions about sustainability. If young adults leave disproportionately, and if thousands of families relocate each year in search of security, what future will the islands inherit? The shift cannot be ignored, because it reflects a deeper issue. the gap between the beauty celebrated worldwide and the day-to-day survival that shapes residents' choices. As policy thinkers, community leaders, and residents confront these realities, the exodus becomes more than a personal journey. It signals systemic conditions that demand change. It is not simply about who departs, but about the structures that make departure the more viable option. Addressing those pressures is becoming one of Hawaii's most urgent challenges. And while solutions remain uncertain, the pattern itself leaves a clear impression. Hawaii in 2025 is still marketed as a dream destination, but for too many born here, survival calculations point away from the islands they love. That dual reality, paradise promoted abroad, departure lived at home, frames the central question that cannot be set aside any longer. Hawaii may remain a vision of paradise for the world, but for those who live here in 2025, the everyday story is far more complicated. Residents balance soaring costs, traffic-choked roads, limited healthcare, and cultural friction that never makes it into the ads. What outsiders see as ease too often feels like exhaustion at home, where survival demands constant compromise. The pressure forces young adults to leave, weakening the very communities that sustain Hawaii's identity. So the question grows sharper: is paradise still paradise if the people who call it home can no longer afford to stay? If you lived here, what trade-off would you make? Lower costs or the view? Tell us why in the comments.